Chain Truth. From the January-February 2017 issue of Harvard Business Review, according to Marco Lakhani, the blockchain could slash the cost of transactions and reshape the economy. Here is some insight and its strategic implications. Contracts, transactions, and the records of them are among the defining structures in our economic, legal, and political systems. They protect assets and set organizational boundaries. They establish and verify identities and chronicle events. They govern interactions among nations, organizations, communities, and individuals. They guide managerial and social action. And yet these critical tools and the bureaucracies formed to manage them have not kept up with the economy's digital transformation. They're like a rush-hour gridlock trapping a Formula One race car. In a digital world, the way we regulate and maintain administrative control has to change. Blockchain promises to solve this problem. The technology at the heart of Bitcoin and other virtual currencies, blockchain is an open, distributed ledger that can record transactions between two parties efficiently and in a verifiable and permanent way. The ledger itself can also be programmed to trigger transactions automatically. With blockchain, we can imagine a world in which contracts are embedded in digital code and stored in transparent, shared databases, where they are protected from deletion, tampering, and revision. In this world, every agreement, every process, every task, and every payment would have a digital record and signature that could be identified, validated, stored, and shared. Intermediaries like lawyers, brokers, and bankers might no longer be necessary. Individuals, organizations, machines, and algorithms would freely transact and interact with one another with little friction. This is the immense potential of blockchain. Indeed, virtually everyone has heard the claim that blockchain will revolutionize business and redefine companies and economies. Although we share the enthusiasm for its potential, we worry about the hype. It's not just security issues, such as the 2014 collapse of one Bitcoin exchange and the more recent hacks of others, that concern us. Our experience studying technological innovation tells us that if there's to be a blockchain revolution, many barriers, technological, governance, organizational, and even societal, will have to fall. It would be a mistake to rush headlong into blockchain innovation without understanding how it is likely to take hold. True blockchain-led transformation of business and government, we believe, is still many years away. That's because blockchain is not a disruptive technology, which can attack a traditional business model with a lower-cost solution and overtake incumbent firms quickly. Blockchain is a foundational technology. It has the potential to create new foundations for our economic and social systems. But while the impact will be enormous, it will take decades for blockchain to seep into our economic and social infrastructure. The process of adoption will be gradual and steady, not sudden, as waves of technological and institutional change gain momentum. Relative patterns of technological adoption. Before jumping into blockchain strategy and investment, let's reflect on what we know about technology adoption and, in particular, the transformation process typical of other foundational technologies. One of the most relevant examples is distributed computer networking technology, seen in the adoption of TCP/IP, Transmission Control Protocol/Internet Protocol, which laid the groundwork for the development of the Internet. Introduced in 1972, TCP/IP first gained traction in a single use case, as the basis for e-mail among the researchers on ARPANET, the U.S. Department of Defense precursor to the commercial Internet. Before TCP/IP, telecommunications architecture was based on circuit switching, in which connections between two parties or machines had to be pre-established and sustained throughout an exchange. To ensure that any two nodes could communicate, telecom service providers and equipment manufacturers had invested billions in building dedicated lines. TCP/IP turned that model on its head. The new protocol transmitted information by digitizing it and breaking it up into very small packets, each including address information. Once released into the network, the packets could take any route to the recipient. Smart sending and receiving nodes at the network's edges could disassemble and reassemble the packets and interpret the encoded data. There was no need for dedicated private lines or massive infrastructure. TCP/IP created an open, shared public network without any central authority or party responsible for its maintenance and improvement. Traditional telecommunications and computing sectors looked on TCP/IP with skepticism. Few imagined that robust data, messaging, voice, and video connections could be established on the new architecture or that the associated system could be secure and scale up. But during the late 1980s and 1990s, a growing number of firms, such as Sun, Next, Hewlett, Packard, and Silicon Graphics, used TCP/IP, in part to create localized private networks within organizations. To do so, they developed building blocks and tools that broadened its use beyond e-mail, gradually replacing more traditional local network technologies and standards. As organizations adopted these building blocks and tools, they saw dramatic gains in productivity. TCP/IP burst into broad public use with the advent of the World Wide Web in the mid-1990s. New technology companies quickly emerged to provide the plumbing, the hardware, software, and services needed to connect to the now public network and exchange information. Netscape commercialized browsers, web servers, and other tools and components that aided the development and adoption of Internet services and applications. Sun drove the development of Java, the application programming language. As information on the web grew exponentially, InfoSeek, Excite, AltaVista, and Yahoo were born to guide users around it. Once this basic infrastructure gained critical mass, a new generation of companies took advantage of low-cost connectivity by creating Internet services that were compelling substitutes for existing businesses. CNET moved news online. Amazon offered more books for sale than any bookshop. Priceline and Expedia made it easier to buy airline tickets and brought unprecedented transparency to the process. The ability of these newcomers to get extensive reach at relatively low cost put significant pressure on traditional businesses like newspapers and brick-and-mortar retailers. Relying on broad internet connectivity, the next wave of companies created novel, transformative applications that fundamentally changed the way businesses created and captured value. These companies were built on a new peer-to-peer architecture and generated value by coordinating distributed networks of users. Think of how eBay changed online retail through auctions, Napster changed the music industry, Skype changed telecommunications, and Google, which exploited user-generated links to provide more relevant results, changed web search. Companies are already using blockchain to track items through complex supply chains. Ultimately, it took more than 30 years for TCP/IP to move through all the phases: single use, localized use, substitution, and transformation, and reshape the economy. Today more than half the world's most valuable public companies have Internet-driven, platform-based business models. The very foundations of our economy have changed. Physical scale and unique intellectual property no longer confer unbeatable advantages. Increasingly, the economic leaders are enterprises that act as keystones, proactively organizing, influencing, and coordinating widespread networks of communities, users, and organizations. The new architecture. Blockchain, a peer-to-peer peer-to-peer network that sits on top of the Internet was introduced in October 2008 as part of a proposal for Bitcoin, a virtual currency system that eschewed a central authority for issuing currency, transferring ownership, and confirming transactions. Bitcoin is the first application of blockchain technology. The parallels between blockchain and TCP/IP are clear. Just as email enabled bilateral messaging, Bitcoin enables bilateral financial transactions. The development and maintenance of blockchain is open, distributed, and shared just like TCP/IPs. A team of volunteers around the world maintains the core software. And just like email, Bitcoin first caught on with an enthusiastic but relatively small community. TCP/IP unlocked new economy value by dramatically lowering the cost of connections. Similarly, blockchain could dramatically reduce the cost of transactions. It has the potential to become the system of record for all transactions. If that happens, the economy will once again undergo a radical shift, as new, blockchain-based sources of influence and control emerge. Consider how business works now. Keeping ongoing records of transactions is a core function of any business. Those records track past actions and performance and guide planning for the future. They provide a view not only of how the organization works internally but also of the organization's outside relationships. Every organization keeps its own records, and they're private. Many organizations have no master ledger of all their activities, instead records are distributed across internal units and functions. The problem is, reconciling transactions across individual and private ledgers takes a lot of time and is prone to error. For example, a typical stock transaction can be executed within microseconds, often without human intervention. However, the ownership transfer of the stock can take as long as a week. That's because the parties have no access to each other's ledgers and can't automatically verify that the assets are in fact owned and can be transferred. Instead, a series of intermediaries act as guarantors of assets as the record of the transaction traverses organizations and the ledgers are individually updated. In a blockchain system, the ledger is replicated in a large number of identical databases, each hosted and maintained by an interested party. When changes are entered in one copy, all the other copies are simultaneously updated. So as transactions occur, records of the value and assets exchanged are permanently entered in all ledgers. There is no need for third-party intermediaries to verify or transfer ownership. If a stock transaction took place on a blockchain-based system, it would be settled within seconds, securely and verifiably. The infamous hacks that have hit Bitcoin exchanges exposed weaknesses not in the blockchain itself but in separate systems linked to parties using the blockchain. A framework for blockchain adoption. If Bitcoin is like early email, is blockchain decades from reaching its full potential? In our view, the answer is a qualified yes. We can't predict exactly how many years the transformation will take, but we can guess which kinds of applications will gain traction first and how blockchain's broad acceptance will eventually come about. How foundational technologies take hold. Through analysis, history suggests that two dimensions affect how a foundational technology and its business use cases evolve. The first is novelty, the degree to which an application is new to the world. The more novel it is, the more effort will be required to ensure that users understand what problems it solves. The second dimension is complexity, represented by the level of ecosystem coordination involved, the number and diversity of parties that need to work together to produce value with the technology. For example, a social network with just one member is of little use. A social network is worthwhile only when many of your own connections have signed on to it. Other users of the application must be brought on board to generate value for all participants. The same will be true for many blockchain applications. And, as the scale and impact of those applications increase, their adoption will require significant institutional change. We've developed a framework that maps innovations against these two contextual dimensions, dividing them into quadrants. See the exhibit How Foundational Technologies Take Hold. Each quadrant represents a stage of technology development. Identifying which one a blockchain innovation falls into will help executives understand the types of challenges it presents, the level of collaboration and consensus it needs, and the legislative and regulatory efforts it will require. The map will also suggest what kind of processes and infrastructure must be established to facilitate the innovation's adoption. Managers can use it to assess the state of blockchain development in any industry, as well as to evaluate strategic investments in their own blockchain capabilities. Single use. In the first quadrant are low novelty and low coordination applications that create better, less costly, highly focused solutions. E-mail, a cheap alternative to phone calls, faxes, and snail mail, was a single-use application for TCP/IP, even though its value rose with the number of users. Bitcoin, too, falls into this quadrant. Even in its early days, Bitcoin offered immediate value to the few people who used it simply as an alternative payment method. You can think of it as a complex e-mail that transfers not just information but also actual value. At the end of 2016, the value of Bitcoin transactions was expected to hit $92 billion. That's still a rounding error compared with the $411 trillion in total global payments, but Bitcoin is growing fast and increasingly important in contexts such as instant payments and foreign currency and asset trading, where the present financial system has limitations. Localization. The second quadrant comprises innovations that are relatively high in novelty but need only a limited number of users to create immediate value, so it's still relatively easy to promote their adoption. If blockchain follows the path network technologies took in business, we can expect blockchain innovations to build on single-use applications to create local private networks on which multiple organizations are connected through a distributed ledger. Much of the initial private blockchain-based development is taking place in the financial services sector, often within small networks of firms, so the coordination requirements are relatively modest. Nasdaq is working with Chain.com, one of many blockchain infrastructure providers, to offer technology for processing and validating financial transactions. Bank of America, J.P. Morgan, the New York Stock Exchange, Fidelity Investments, and Standard Chartered are testing blockchain technology as a replacement for paper-based and manual transaction processing in such areas as trade finance, foreign exchange, cross-border settlement, and securities settlement. The Bank of Canada is testing a digital currency called CAD, coin for interbank transfers. We anticipate a proliferation of private blockchains that serve specific purposes for various industries. Substitution. The third quadrant contains applications that are relatively low in novelty because they build on existing single-use and localized applications, but are high in coordination needs because they involve broader and increasingly public uses. These innovations aim to replace entire ways of doing business. They face high barriers to adoption, however, not only do they require more coordination but the processes they hope to replace may be full-blown and deeply embedded within organizations and institutions. Examples of substitutes include cryptocurrencies, new, fully formed currency systems that have grown out of the simple Bitcoin payment technology. The critical difference is that a cryptocurrency requires every party that does monetary transactions to adopt it, challenging governments and institutions that have long handled and overseen such transactions. Consumers also have to change their behavior and understand how to implement the new functional capability of the cryptocurrency. A recent experiment at MIT highlights the challenges ahead for digital currency systems. In 2014, the MIT Bitcoin Club provided each of MIT's 4,494 undergraduates with $100 in Bitcoin. Interestingly, 30% of the students did not even sign up for the free money, and 20% of the UPS converted the Bitcoin to cash within a few weeks. Even the technically savvy had a tough time understanding how or where to use Bitcoin. One of the most ambitious substitute blockchain applications is Stellar, a nonprofit that aims to bring affordable financial services, including banking, micropayments, and remittances, to people who've never had access to them. Stellar offers its own virtual currency, LMNs, and also allows users to retain on its system a range of assets, including other currencies, telephone minutes, and data credits. Stellar initially focused on Africa, particularly Nigeria, the largest economy there. It has seen significant adoption among its target population and proved its cost-effectiveness. But its future is by no means certain, because the ecosystem coordination challenges are high. Although grassroots adoption has demonstrated the viability of Stellar to become a banking standard, it will need to influence government policy and persuade central banks and large organizations to use it. That could take years of concerted effort. Transformation. If successful, the last quadrant falls completely into novel applications that could change the very nature of economic, social, and political systems. They involve coordinating the activity of many actors and gaining institutional agreement on standards and processes. Their adoption will require major social, legal, and political change. Smart contracts may be the most transformative blockchain application at the moment. These automate payments and the transfer of currency or other assets as negotiated conditions are met. For example, a smart contract might send a payment to a supplier as soon as a shipment is delivered. A firm could signal via blockchain that a particular good has been received, or the product could have GPS functionality, which would automatically log a location update that, in turn, triggered a payment. We've already seen a few early experiments with such self-executing contracts in the areas of venture funding, banking, and digital rights management. The implications are fascinating. FIRMs are built on contracts, from incorporation to buyer-supplier relationships to employee relations. If contracts are automated, then what will happen to traditional firm structures, processes, and intermediaries like lawyers and accountants? And what about managers? Their roles would all radically change. Before we get too excited here, though, let's remember that we are decades away from the widespread adoption of smart contracts. They cannot be effective, for instance, without institutional buy-in. A tremendous degree of coordination and clarity on how smart contracts are designed, verified, implemented, and enforced will be required. We believe the institutions responsible for those daunting tasks will take a long time to evolve. And the technology challenges, especially security, are daunting. Analytical approach to blockchain investment. How should executives think about blockchain for their own organizations? Our framework can help companies identify the right opportunities. Foremost, the easiest place to start is single-use applications, which minimize risk because they aren't new and involve little coordination with third parties. One strategy is to add Bitcoin as a payment mechanism. The infrastructure and market for Bitcoin are already well developed, and adopting the virtual currency will force a variety of functions, including IT, finance, accounting, sales, and marketing, to build blockchain capabilities. Another low risk approach is to use blockchain internally as a database for applications like managing physical and digital assets, recording internal transactions, and verifying identities. This may be an especially useful solution for companies struggling to reconcile multiple internal databases. Testing out single-use applications will help organizations develop the skills they need for more advanced applications. And thanks to the emergence of cloud-based blockchain services from both start-ups and large platforms like Amazon and Microsoft, experimentation is getting easier all the time. Localized applications are a natural next step for companies. We're seeing a lot of investment in private blockchain networks right now, and the projects involved seem poised for real short-term impact. Financial services companies, for example, are finding that the private blockchain networks they've set up with a limited number of trusted counterparties can significantly reduce transaction costs. Organizations can also tackle specific problems in transactions across boundaries with localized applications. Companies are already using blockchain to track items through complex supply chains, for instance. This is happening in the diamond industry, where gems are being traced from mines to consumers. The technology for such experiments is now available off the shelf. Developing substitute applications requires careful planning, since existing solutions may be difficult to dislodge. One way to go may be to focus on replacements that won't require end users to change their behavior much but present alternatives to expensive or unattractive solutions. To get traction, substitutes must deliver functionality as good as traditional solutions and must be easy for the ecosystem to absorb and adopt. First Data's foray into blockchain-based gift cards is a good example of a well-considered substitute. Retailers that offer them to consumers can dramatically lower costs per transaction and enhance security by using blockchain to track the flows of currency within accounts without relying on external payment processors. These NEW gift cards even allow transfers of balances and transaction capability between merchants via the common ledger. Transformative applications are still far away. But it makes sense to evaluate their possibilities now and invest in developing technology that can enable them. They will be most powerful when tied to a new business model in which the logic of value creation and capture departs from existing approaches. Such business models are hard to adopt but can unlock future growth for companies. Consider how law firms will have to change to make smart contracts viable. They'll need to develop new expertise in software and blockchain programming. They'll probably also have to rethink their hourly payment model and entertain the idea of charging transaction or hosting fees for contracts, to name just two possible approaches. Whatever tack they take, executives must be sure they understand and have tested the business model implications before making any switch. Transformative scenarios will take off last, but they will also deliver enormous value. Two areas where they could have a profound impact: large-scale public identity systems for such functions as passport control, and algorithm-driven decision-making in prevention of money laundering and in complex financial transactions that involve many parties. We expect these applications won't reach broad adoption and critical mass for at least another decade and probably more. Transformative applications will also give rise to new platform-level players that will coordinate and govern the new ecosystems. These will be the Googles and Facebooks of the next generation. It will require patience to realize such opportunities. Though it may be premature to start making significant investments in them now, developing the required foundations for them, tools and standards, is still worthwhile. Conclusion: in addition to providing a good template for blockchain's adoption, TCP/IP has most likely smoothed the way for it. TCP/IP has become ubiquitous, and blockchain applications are being built on top of the digital data, communication, and computation infrastructure, which lowers the cost of experimentation and will allow new use cases to emerge rapidly. With our framework, executives can figure out where to start building their organizational capabilities for blockchain today. They need to ensure that their staffs learn about blockchain, to develop company-specific applications across the quadrants we've identified, and to invest in blockchain infrastructure. But given the time horizons, barriers to adoption, and sheer complexity involved in getting to TCP/IP levels of acceptance, executives should think carefully about the risks involved in experimenting with blockchain. Clear why, starting small is a good way to develop the know-how to think bigger. But the level of investment should depend on the context of the company and the industry. Financial services companies are already well down the road to blockchain adoption. Manufacturing is not. No matter what the context, there's a strong possibility that blockchain will affect your business. The very big question is when. Read more at Harvard Business Review. Marco Lakhani, https://hbr.org/2017/01/The Truth About Blockchain, Harvard Business Review.